In a small, dimly lit art gallery tucked away on a quiet street in the heart of the city, young Julian Harris stood nervously, holding a portfolio of his artwork under his arm. His hands were clammy, and his heart pounded in his chest as he waited for the gallery owner, Mrs. Marlowe, to look over his work. The walls were lined with expensive paintings, bright, colorful, and intricate works of art from established artists who were known for their exquisite technique and high-profile reputations. Julian's work, on the other hand, was raw, bold, and filled with emotion. The colors were darker, more muted, and the strokes were imperfect. But it was his truth, his personal expression as a black artist navigating a world that didn't always embrace him. He had spent years perfecting his craft, trying to create pieces that told stories of his heritage, his struggles, and his identity. But in this world of polished galleries and million-dollar pieces, his work had been mostly dismissed. No one was interested in his unconventional approach, and Julian often found himself hidden in the shadows of larger, more famous names. But he couldn't stop creating. He couldn't stop painting. Mrs. Marlowe, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a cold demeanor, barely looked up as Julian approached her desk. Her gallery had been a staple in the art scene for over 2 decades, and she was known for being picky, only showcasing the work of established and renowned artists. It was a business to her, a place where art was a commodity, a thing to be bought and sold for profit, not a passion to be nurtured. "Well, young man, what do we have here?" Mrs. Marlowe asked in a tone that suggested she had better things to do. Her voice was clipped, and she didn't bother to make eye contact as she flipped through a catalog of upcoming exhibitions. I wanted to show you my work," Julian said, his voice faltering. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, but now that he was here, it felt as though his entire body was shaking under the weight of his nerves. Mrs. Marlowe finally glanced up, sizing him up with a cold, uninterested gaze. She took a moment to look him over, his unkempt hair, the simple black hoodie, and the worn sneakers he wore because he couldn't afford anything else. She didn't see the artist. She only saw the young black man in front of her, and her immediate judgment was harsh. "Well, we're really only looking for serious, professional artists at the moment," she said, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. "You can leave your portfolio here, and I'll have someone take a look, but I can't promise anything." Julian swallowed hard. He could feel the sting of her words, each one a little deeper than the last. He had been prepared for rejection, he had been rejected by galleries before, but something about the way Mrs. Marlowe treated him made it feel different. She didn't just dismiss his art, she dismissed him as a person, as though his very presence wasn't worthy of respect. He bit his lip, holding back the frustration and anger that were beginning to boil inside of him. But he didn't want to lose control. He had been taught to keep his emotions in check, to play the game, and to keep pushing forward despite the constant setbacks. So, instead of arguing, he nodded and handed her the portfolio. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for your time." Mrs. Marlowe took the portfolio from him without another word, and Julian walked toward the door. As he left the gallery, he felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. His dreams of becoming a recognized artist felt more distant than ever, and the weight of it pressed heavily on his chest. How could he ever make it in this world? How could someone like him, someone with so little, ever break through the barriers of a system that seemed designed to keep people like him out? Julian walked out onto the busy street, the sounds of the city rushing around him, but none of it seemed to matter. The world was moving on, and he was stuck, caught in a cycle of rejection, unnoticed and unappreciated. His art was a reflection of his life, a series of struggles, triumphs, and aspirations that no one seemed to care about. But he cared. And that had to be enough. He was on the verge of giving up. Maybe it was time to find another path, one that didn't involve so much pain, so much rejection. But the thought of quitting was unbearable. He couldn't stop painting. He couldn't stop telling his stories. The moment of clarity. A week later, Julian was in his small studio apartment, standing in front of a canvas that was still only half finished. The light from the street lamp outside filtered through his window, casting a soft glow on the painting. It was an abstract piece, a mix of harsh reds and blues with streaks of black and gold, representing the anger, the passion, and the uncertainty of life as a black man in a world that often overlooked him. He had been working on it for days, and even though he felt exhausted, he couldn't stop. He couldn't let go of this work, not now. There was something deep inside him that told him he was on the right path, that he had something important to say. He just needed the right opportunity, the right person to notice him. As he added the final touches to the painting, a thought crossed his mind: what if he was never noticed? What if this was all just a pipe dream, a fantasy he had built up in his head? He had always been told that his art wasn't good enough, that it wasn't proper or refined. What if everyone was right? What if he was destined to be another struggling artist, never seeing the recognition he longed for? The thought made him pause, but only for a moment. He shook his head, as if trying to shake the doubts out of his mind. No, he muttered to himself. I'm not giving up. I won't. With renewed determination, Julian stepped back from the canvas, admiring the piece for what felt like the first time. It was beautiful, chaotic, and full of life. He knew that no one had ever seen art like this before. And one day, someone would. He couldn't predict how it would happen or when, but Julian Harris wasn't going to stop creating. He would find a way to make the world see him, to make the world see his art. It might take time, but he had one thing that mattered more than anything else: his belief in himself. It had been nearly a month since Julian's fateful encounter with Mrs. Marlowe, and still, nothing had changed. His days were filled with quiet solitude in his small studio apartment. He painted, often for hours on end, but the world outside his walls had not taken notice. The rejection was a constant hum in the back of his mind, a reminder that no matter how hard he worked, he remained invisible to the people who mattered in the art world. His phone rarely rang. His emails were mostly just spam or messages from friends who didn't quite understand his dream. He wasn't even sure if any of the galleries he'd submitted his work to had actually taken the time to look at his portfolio. But even with the constant rejection, Julian couldn't stop. The brush in his hand felt right, it was his only escape. His art was his rebellion, his way of fighting back against a world that often seemed to disregard his existence. But things were about to change, though Julian had no idea just how dramatically. One evening, as Julian worked on his latest piece, a knock echoed from his door. It was late, nearly 9 p.m., and he wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitant, he wiped his hands on a rag and opened the door to find a tall woman with an air of confident authority standing in the hallway. She had dark hair, styled in an elegant bob, and wore a black blazer over a sharp white blouse. The type of person you would expect to see at a high-end art gallery opening, not standing on a quiet residential street knocking on an artist's door. "Julian Harris?" the woman asked, her voice firm but not unkind. "Yes, that's me," he replied, confused but intrigued. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled warmly, introducing herself as Amanda Stevens. She worked as an art curator for a prestigious auction house, one that specialized in high-end contemporary art, and she had been following Julian's work for some time. His name had surfaced on her radar after his portfolio had been anonymously submitted to one of the most famous auction events of the year. Amanda had seen glimpses of his work at various online galleries, and now she wanted to see it in person. "I'm here because we believe your art has immense potential," Amanda said, her tone casual but laced with genuine excitement. "We'd like to feature your pieces in an upcoming auction. We think you have what it takes to make a significant impact in the art world. Your style is unique, raw, and vibrant. It's exactly what collectors are looking for." For a moment, Julian thought he had misheard her. He blinked, unsure if he had processed what she had just said. An auction? His work? It sounded too good to be true. "Wait, are you saying my work is worth something? People want to buy it?" Julian stammered, his voice a mix of disbelief and excitement. Amanda nodded. "Your art is already gaining attention, and we believe it will only continue to rise in value. We'd like to help you reach a wider audience and bring your pieces to those who will appreciate and invest in your talent. The shock of it all hit him like a wave. Just days ago, he had been questioning his place in the art world, wondering if his work was even worth showing. Now, here was a professional from one of the most prestigious auction houses telling him that his art was worth millions, that it had value, and that people were willing to pay for it. "How did you find me?" Julian asked, still trying to process the information. "I came across your name through a few of the online exhibitions you've been featured in," Amanda explained. "We have scouts who monitor the emerging talent in the art community, and your work stood out. Your pieces speak to something deeper, something that resonates with collectors looking for more than just decorative art. It's not just about the image, it's about the story, the emotion. Your paintings have layers that are rare in this field." Julian was speechless. The validation he had been seeking for so long was suddenly right in front of him. But even as Amanda spoke, a part of him struggled to accept what was happening. How could he, someone who had barely been able to get his work shown in small, local galleries, now be in a position to sell his art to the highest bidder? "I never expected this," Julian said quietly. I thought no one would ever care about my art. I've been rejected by so many galleries. They said it wasn't polished enough, not refined enough." Amanda's expression softened. There's always a market for authenticity, for the raw truth of what someone is expressing. That's what people connect with. And that's why we think you have the potential to do something incredible. We want to give you that opportunity. As the realization began to settle in, Julian felt a rush of emotions. He had worked so hard, for so long, and for the first time, it seemed like his dream was within reach. But there was also fear that maybe it was all a fluke, that the offer would fall apart, that he would somehow fail at the one chance he had been given. Amanda handed him a business card with her contact information and the auction house's details. "Let's meet tomorrow," she said, "and we can discuss the specifics. You'll be amazed at what we can do for your career." The door closed behind her as Julian stood there, frozen in place. His hands were trembling. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced down at the business card in his hand. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the breakthrough he never thought he would get. The world he had dreamed of, one where his work would be appreciated and valued, was finally opening up to him. The next day, Julian couldn't focus. His mind raced with thoughts of the meeting. Would he be ready? Could he handle the pressure of such a big opportunity? But despite the fear, the excitement was undeniable. He had always known there was something special about his art. Now, others were beginning to see it too. Julian's heart raced with every step he took toward the sleek, glass-fronted building of the auction house. It was a world of wealth and privilege, one that felt both exciting and intimidating. A stark contrast to the small, dim gallery where he had been rejected just weeks earlier. As he approached the entrance, he adjusted his jacket, feeling out of place. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, wasn't sure how to act in a world that valued art as a commodity, as something to be bought and sold for enormous sums. But despite the nervousness gnawing at him, there was a sense of triumph. He had been seen, truly seen, for the first time. Amanda Stevens, the art curator, had been right, his work had layers, and it had depth. He had poured his soul into each piece, and now someone else recognized it, too. They saw what he had always known, his art wasn't just something to decorate walls, it was something that spoke, something that demanded attention. Amanda had arranged a meeting for Julian at the auction house, promising to walk him through the process and explain what would happen next. It felt surreal, but Julian tried his best to push his doubts aside. He had been given a chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As he entered the building, the air was cool and sterile. A series of elegant sculptures adorned the foyer, and the walls were lined with the kind of paintings Julian had only ever dreamed of owning. There were works from celebrated artists, pieces that could easily sell for millions, displayed with careful precision. It was the world he had always imagined, the kind of space where his art could find its place, among the greats. Amanda greeted him with a warm smile as he walked in. "Julian, "It's so good to see you again," she said, guiding him through a series of hallways adorned with artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. After a brief conversation about logistics, Amanda led Julian to the large conference room where a few of the senior members of the auction house were already gathered. They all greeted him with polite smiles, but Julian could tell there was something a little off about the way they were sizing him up. He was nervous, and it wasn't just because he was about to sign an important deal. There was something about the atmosphere, the look in their eyes, that made him uneasy. They were treating him like a newcomer, someone who might not belong, despite the potential they had seen in his work. As Amanda sat down at the head of the table and began discussing the details of his upcoming auction, Julian tried to push the feeling aside. But he couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that tugged at him. These people were professionals. They were used to handling artists who had already made a name for themselves. They had seen works worth millions before, pieces that would go down in history. What did they see in his art, really? Was it just another trendy piece that would sell for a fleeting moment? Or was it truly something special? Amanda noticed his hesitation. "Don't worry, Julian," she said reassuringly. "We vetted your work. You've got something rare here. This is the beginning of something incredible." But Julian couldn't help but glance around at the serious faces of the auction house staff. They were speaking about his art as though it were just another asset, another way to make money. There was a disconnection between their excitement and his growing discomfort. Was it possible that the world of high-end art was more about business than about the artist's voice? Was he just a product to them? Later that evening, as Julian walked back to his apartment, his mind replayed the meeting. Despite Amanda's assurances, he felt a sense of doubt creeping into his thoughts. Was he ready for this? Was this the right path for him, or was he becoming a cog in a machine that valued profits over people? The following morning, Julian made his way to the gallery where it all began, the same place where Mrs. Marlowe had mocked him, dismissing his art without a second glance. He wasn't sure why he was going back. Maybe it was the lingering uncertainty about the auction house, or maybe it was the desire to confront the person who had once made him feel so small. But today, he wasn't the same person who had walked through that door weeks ago. Today, he was someone with a future, someone whose work had been recognized. Today, he was someone with power. He stepped into the familiar, yet unwelcoming space of the gallery. Mrs. Marlowe was at her desk, flipping through a magazine, her icy demeanor as unchanged as ever. She looked up when he entered, but this time, there was no dismissive sneer, no coldness. There was only surprise. "Julian Harris," she said, raising an eyebrow. "What brings you back here? I thought you would have found better opportunities by now." Julian smiled politely, but there was a new confidence in his eyes. "Actually, I have found a better opportunity. I've been given a chance by one of the top auction houses in the world." Mrs. Marlowe's expression faltered for just a second. She tried to mask her surprise, but it was clear that she wasn't expecting this. Julian could see the skepticism in her eyes as she leaned back in her chair. "An auction house, you say? Interesting. Well, good for you, I suppose. I don't expect it will last long. The art world is full of trends, and often, the hype fades as quickly as it arrives." Her words stung more than they should have. Julian's instincts told him to walk away, to ignore her jaded attitude. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Marlowe was underestimating him, just as she had before. "I'll prove you wrong," he said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. "I know my art has value, and the people who are seeing it now know it too." Mrs. Marlowe chuckled, but it was a hollow sound. "I've seen many artists come and go, Julian. I've watched countless new talents rise only to fall back into obscurity. Don't let the hype cloud your judgment. It's all temporary." Julian stood straighter, the words stinging more than he expected, but he wasn't going to let her crush his confidence. "Not now. Maybe," he said, looking her directly in the eye, "but my art is more than just a trend. And I'm just getting started." As he left the gallery, Julian felt a wave of triumph. Mrs. Marlowe's skepticism no longer mattered. He had already moved past her. He had found his place in the art world, and he was ready to prove that he belonged there. The day of the auction arrived, and Julian stood at the back of the crowded, opulent hall, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. His paintings, each one infused with the raw emotion and struggles of his life, were now displayed under bright lights for the world to see. The auction house had chosen several pieces to showcase, and as he looked around, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness. This was no longer his small studio, or the local gallery, this was the big leagues. The hall was filled with well-dressed collectors, art critics, and buyers, all moving about the room, whispering to one another as they examined the pieces on display. Julian had never been in such a room before. It was surreal to see people who had the wealth and influence to purchase his art, his work, without even a second thought. He glanced over at Amanda Stevens, who was speaking with a few of the buyers. She had been a constant source of encouragement throughout the process, assuring him that his work was ready to be shown to the world. The auction house had gone all out to ensure the event would be a success. They had promoted his pieces extensively, and now it was time for the world to decide how much they were worth. Amanda caught sight of him and waved him over. She looked just as poised and confident as always, but Julian could tell there was a flicker of excitement in her eyes. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice low. Julian smiled nervously. "I think so. It's all a bit overwhelming, to be honest." Amanda chuckled. "It's always like this the first time. But you've got the talent. You've got what it takes. Just let the art speak for itself." As Julian nodded, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This wasn't just any auction. This was the kind of event that would change the course of his life. This could be the turning point he had been waiting for, one that would take him from the unknown artist in a small apartment to one of the sought-after names in the art world. The question now was, would the world see his worth? As the bidding began, Julian's heart raced. He watched from the back as one of his pieces, a large, chaotic canvas filled with streaks of red and black, was rolled to the front. The auctioneer's voice rang out, smooth and authoritative, as he introduced the painting and began the bidding. Starting at $100,000 for this incredible work by Julian Harris. The colors, the energy, this piece embodies the raw emotions that have defined his journey as an artist. "Do I hear $100,000? Julian's breath caught in his throat. $100,000? That was more money than he had ever imagined. He had always dreamed of being recognized, but he never expected anything like this. The bidding began, moving quickly as collectors jostled for the piece, pushing the price higher and higher. $200,000, someone called out from the crowd. Julian's eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. The value of his art was climbing faster than he could process. The auctioneer called out, $300,000. "Do I hear $350,000? A man at the front of the room raised his paddle, signaling his bid. The competition was fierce, but Julian could see that there was real interest in his work. People were taking it seriously. This wasn't just a trend, it was something they wanted to own. Something they wanted to be part of. When the bidding finally slowed down, Julian could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Sold for $450,000, the auctioneer called out, a broad smile on his face. The room erupted in applause, and Julian stood frozen in disbelief. His first piece had sold for almost $500,000. He had never imagined such a moment, let alone that it would happen so quickly. The applause was for him, his work, his art. It was a validation that he had been waiting for, and it felt as though the world had finally recognized his value. Amanda approached him, her face beaming with pride. "See? What did I tell you?" she said, clapping him on the back. "You've got it. This is just the beginning." Julian was overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through him, pride, excitement, disbelief. But there was one thing that stood out above all else: he had done it. His work, once dismissed and ignored, was now worth more than he had ever thought possible. And it wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was real, tangible, and it was happening right in front of him. As the auction continued, more of his pieces were put up for bid, and with each one, the price climbed higher. There was no turning back now. The art world had accepted him, and he was a part of it. The success of the auction was undeniable, and Julian found himself surrounded by buyers and critics, all eager to talk about his work, to ask questions, and to learn more about the artist behind the pieces. But amidst the excitement, Julian couldn't help but think back to the day he had first met Mrs. Marlowe. He remembered her dismissive attitude, her certainty that his art wasn't worth anything. He had almost let her words define him, almost allowed her narrow view of the art world to hold him back. But now, as he stood there, surrounded by success, Julian realized that he had outgrown her. He had moved past the gatekeepers who thought they could dictate what was valuable and what wasn't. As the night wore on, Julian found himself being introduced to some of the most influential figures in the art world. But rather than feeling intimidated, he stood tall, confident in his own ability and the strength of his work. This was where he belonged. The days following the auction felt like a whirlwind for Julian. His life had shifted in a way he couldn't have predicted. The world he had once dreamed of being a part of, the elite art circles, the galleries, the collectors, was now his reality. As the phone calls and emails flooded in, Julian could hardly keep up. Buyers from all over the world were reaching out, eager to commission new pieces, to own a part of his journey. But amidst the newfound success, a strange sense of emptiness began to settle in. Julian was no longer just the quiet artist in his studio, he was now a brand, a commodity, something to be marketed and sold. As the money flowed in, so did the pressure. People weren't just buying his art, they were buying into a vision of him, an idea of who he was. It wasn't about his soul anymore, it was about their perception of his soul. He had worked so hard to get here. He had poured every ounce of his passion into each brushstroke, hoping that the world would see his truth. But now that it had happened, Julian wasn't sure what to make of it. He had achieved what so many artists dreamed of, but the reality wasn't as fulfilling as he had imagined. Was this success really his? Or was he just another pawn in a world that took advantage of artists' raw talent to create wealth for others? Amanda had been in constant contact, guiding him through the process of becoming an established artist. She had arranged meetings with collectors and art critics, making sure that his name was everywhere it needed to be. The pressure to keep creating, to keep proving himself, weighed heavily on him. Every new piece was scrutinized more intensely than the last. His art was no longer a form of self-expression, it was a business, a product to be sold and consumed. One afternoon, as Julian sat in his studio, staring at a blank canvas, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something important. His mind was filled with doubts. Was his art still his own? Or had it become a tool to further his success? He had always been driven by a need to express himself, to share the stories and emotions that lurked beneath the surface. But now, it felt like there was an expectation hanging over him, one that said he needed to produce for the sake of producing, to make something that would satisfy his buyers and keep the money coming in. The doorbell rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Amanda, as always, with another round of meetings lined up, more collectors eager to see his work. She smiled brightly as she walked in, but Julian could sense that she had noticed the change in him. "Julian, you've been amazing," Amanda said, her tone full of enthusiasm. "You're on fire right now. The art world is in awe of you. This is your moment, don't let it slip away." Julian forced a smile, nodding. "I know. It's just a lot to take in." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "It's just that, everything feels so different now," he admitted. "I don't know if it's the pressure to keep making new work or the fact that everyone seems to want a piece of me, but I'm not sure if I'm still doing this for the right reasons anymore." Amanda frowned slightly, though her smile never quite faded. "I get it. It's a lot, and the pressure to deliver can be overwhelming. But you're an artist. This is what you've always wanted. You've worked so hard to get here, and now you have the chance to make a real impact on the world." Julian felt a pang of frustration, but he held it back. He wasn't angry with her, he was angry with himself. He had allowed his dream to be co-opted, to be twisted into something that no longer felt true. He had worked so hard to get recognition, but now he wasn't sure what to do with it. The whole thing felt like a double-edged sword. Yes, he had made it, but now that he was here, he wasn't sure what the path forward was. "I appreciate everything you've done, Amanda," Julian said quietly. "I really do. But I think I need a break. I need to find out why I started doing this in the first place." Amanda looked at him carefully, her gaze shifting from professional to more personal. "Julian, I understand. But be careful. The world doesn't wait for anyone. The moment you step away, there are other artists who'll be right there, ready to take your place." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Julian felt the weight of them. He knew the art world was fickle, that the next big thing was always just around the corner. But at that moment, he wasn't sure he cared. He needed time to reconnect with his work, to rediscover the passion that had driven him in the first place. "I know," he said softly. "But I can't keep going like this. I need to figure out who I am as an artist, outside of all this hype." Amanda nodded slowly, sensing the internal conflict he was battling. "I understand. Just remember, you're not alone in this. Take the time you need, but don't lose sight of everything you've worked for." As Amanda left, Julian sat back in his chair, staring at the blank canvas before him. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the city outside. The world had opened up to him, but now, more than ever, he needed to find his own way through it. Later that week, Julian took a step back from his busy schedule. He refused all the meeting requests and decided to spend a week focusing solely on his art, without the pressure, without the expectations. He started by revisiting his earlier work, the pieces he had created before he had known what it meant to be famous. He found himself reconnecting with the feelings he had captured in those paintings, the raw emotion, the stories he had told with every brushstroke. And slowly, as the days passed, Julian began to rediscover his love for painting. He no longer cared about what people thought of him, no longer worried about whether or not his next piece would sell for a fortune. For the first time in a long while, Julian painted simply for himself, for the joy of creation, for the truth that only art could reveal. When he returned to the auction house a week later, he felt a new sense of clarity. He was ready, not just to create, but to create on his own terms. It had been a week since Julian decided to step away from the pressure of the art world. He had spent the last several days in solitude, holed up in his studio, painting without the looming thought of an auction or the expectations of collectors. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. The oppressive weight of success had lifted, and with it came a sense of clarity he hadn't realized he had lost. Julian's hands moved across the canvas with a sense of ease, his brushstrokes fluid and deliberate. There was no audience here, no buyers waiting for his next masterpiece. There was only the quiet hum of his thoughts, the canvas, and his desire to create something true, something meaningful. He had been painting for himself once more, and in doing so, he had rediscovered the reason why he had started in the first place. The studio was filled with new works, pieces that were vibrant and full of life, filled with color and emotion. They weren't the calculated works that had sold for so much at the auction. These were raw, personal creations, each one an extension of his soul. He was painting the way he had when he was first starting out, unaware of the world around him, lost in the act of creation. It felt like a rebirth. One afternoon, Amanda arrived at his studio, unannounced. She had been trying to reach him all week, but Julian had avoided her calls and messages. He wasn't ready to talk to anyone about his decision yet. He had needed this space, this time to find himself again. As soon as he saw her standing in the doorway, he knew the conversation would be difficult. "Amanda," he greeted her, standing from his easel. His tone was calm, but there was a hint of tension in his voice. "What's up?" She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the vibrant canvases that filled the space. The bold colors were in stark contrast to the more somber tones of his previous works. Julian could see the curiosity in her eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just took in the changes in his work. But eventually, she spoke. "I've been worried about you, Julian," she said softly. "I've tried calling, but you've been distant. Is everything okay?" Julian sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. He had known this conversation was coming, but he hadn't expected it to be so hard. "I've been trying to figure things out. After the auction, everything happened so fast, and I lost sight of what I was doing. I needed some time to reconnect with why I started painting in the first place." Amanda nodded slowly. "I understand. It's easy to get caught up in the hype. The pressure is real, and I know it can be overwhelming. But you don't have to do this alone." "I know," Julian said, his voice quiet. "But I needed this. I needed to step away from all the noise and remind myself that he gestured around the room, to the canvases and brushes that had once felt like lifelines, this is what matters. I don't want to create just for the sake of creating, to churn out pieces because I'm expected to. I want my work to mean something." Amanda's gaze softened. She took a step closer to him, her tone gentle. "I get it, Julian. And I respect that. But you also need to remember that your work has value, real value. You've already proven that with the auction, and that recognition isn't just some fleeting moment. It's a reflection of your talent. You don't have to sacrifice your soul for success." Julian looked at her, unsure of how to respond. He had heard these words before, but now they seemed different. He wasn't sure if he could find a balance between creating art that felt true to himself and maintaining his success. Would he be able to keep the authenticity of his work while navigating the pressures of the art world? "I don't want to be just a product, Amanda," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't want to become just another name in the art world that people buy into. I want my work to speak for itself, without all the marketing and the hype. I want to make something that lasts." Amanda was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Then she nodded, as though understanding exactly what he meant. "You're right. The pressure to conform is real. But that doesn't mean you can't take control of your narrative. You've already proven that you're not just another artist. You're a force. And now, it's up to you to decide what kind of legacy you want to leave behind." Julian felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Amanda was right, he could control his path. He didn't have to give up his authenticity to be successful. He had already proven that his work had value. Now, it was up to him to decide how he would shape that success. The conversation shifted as Amanda walked over to one of Julian's new paintings, her fingers lightly brushing against the canvas. "This is different, Julian. It's bold. It's raw. There's a story here that's begging to be told." Julian followed her gaze, studying the piece. It was a chaotic blend of colors, a fusion of red, blue, and black that seemed to burst off the canvas. It wasn't a polished piece, it was unfinished, raw in its emotion. But Julian saw the power in it, the energy that it captured. This was what he had been searching for. "Do you think people will buy it?" he asked, a hint of doubt still in his voice. Amanda smiled, her eyes gleaming with certainty. "People will want it. Not just because it's yours, but because it's real. It's honest. And that's what art is supposed to be about." Her words resonated deeply with Julian. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. He didn't need to compromise his vision. He could create the art that was true to him, and people would respond to it. The success he had achieved at the auction wasn't a fluke, it was a reflection of his talent, and he could continue to build on that, on his own terms. That night, Julian began working on his next piece. This time, he wasn't thinking about what the buyers wanted or what would sell. He was painting for himself again, creating a piece that spoke to the emotions he had been feeling over the past few weeks. As his brush moved across the canvas, he felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. This was freedom. This was creation. The months that followed were some of the most transformative in Julian's life. With renewed clarity and a deeper sense of purpose, he set out to redefine his place in the art world. He no longer felt like a pawn in a game controlled by others. His art was his own, and he was ready to take ownership of it, not just as a commodity, but as a true form of self-expression. The art world was still buzzing about his success at the auction, but Julian wasn't interested in resting on his laurels. Instead, he threw himself into his work with an intensity that was both freeing and exhilarating. The pressure to create for the sake of success had melted away, replaced by a burning desire to make something real. He painted with a new understanding of himself, channeling his emotions and experiences into each piece. One evening, as Julian was putting the finishing touches on his latest canvas, his phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. She had been busy organizing more opportunities for him, but she understood his need for space and had respected his decision to take his time. This new message, however, was different. "Julian, there's a gallery in New York that's interested in showcasing your work," it read. "They've seen your latest pieces, and they're calling it the next big thing. This could be the chance to take everything to the next level." Julian stared at the message, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. New York. The city that had always symbolized the pinnacle of success in the art world. It was an opportunity that many artists dreamed of, but Julian wasn't sure he was ready to jump back into the public eye just yet. After all, he had spent so long distancing himself from the pressures of fame. But as he thought about it, a smile slowly spread across his face. He had spent so much time trying to fit into a mold that wasn't his own. Now, he was at a place where he could decide his own terms. If he went to New York, it wouldn't be to chase success, it would be to share his truth with the world, on his own terms. He responded to Amanda, accepting the offer and setting up a meeting with the gallery. The excitement he felt wasn't just about the potential of his work being showcased, it was about the confidence he had found in himself. Julian Harris wasn't just an artist, he was a creator, a storyteller, and now he was ready to let the world hear his voice. When Julian arrived in New York, the city felt alive with energy. The gallery was in the heart of Manhattan, nestled between towering buildings that seemed to stretch into the sky. Inside, the space was sleek and modern, with walls that seemed to hum with anticipation. The gallery owner, an imposing figure named Lawrence Kane, greeted him with a handshake that felt firm and confident. "Mr. Harris," Lawrence said, his voice smooth but direct. "It's an honor to meet you. We've been following your work, and we're incredibly impressed. Your latest pieces have a rawness that the art world has been craving. We believe your art has the potential to redefine what contemporary art is all about." Julian felt a wave of pride wash over him, but he kept his composure. This wasn't about the validation of others, it was about staying true to the journey he had started on. The gallery had seen something in his work, but that didn't mean he had to conform to their expectations. He was here to create on his terms, to show the world the art that had emerged from his deepest thoughts and feelings. The exhibition was set, and as the opening night approached, Julian couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. The night of the event arrived, and Julian stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by his pieces. People whispered among themselves, admiring the colors, the passion, the vulnerability in each painting. He could hear snippets of conversation, words like innovative, authentic, and powerful, floating through the air. For the first time in a long time, Julian realized that he wasn't just showing his work for the sake of selling it. He wasn't creating to fit into some predetermined box. He was sharing a piece of himself with the world. And it felt liberating. As the night wore on, buyers and collectors approached him, eager to discuss his art, but Julian remained focused on the conversations he was having with the people who truly understood his work. Critics, fellow artists, and admirers of his art wanted to know more about the meaning behind his pieces, the stories that inspired them. This was what Julian had always wanted, the chance to connect with people through his work, not just as a name on a price tag. As the evening came to a close, Lawrence Kane approached Julian with a glass of champagne. "I must say, this has been a huge success," he said, raising his glass. "The reception to your work has been overwhelmingly positive. We've sold several pieces tonight, and there are talks of additional exhibitions in major cities. Julian smiled, his heart full. It's been an incredible journey. I'm glad to be here. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. You should be. The world is going to be watching you now. And I think this is only the beginning for you, Julian. As the night came to an end, Julian stood by the window, looking out at the city. The lights of New York glittered in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He had made it. He had achieved everything he had once dreamed of, but it wasn't just about the fame or the money, it was about staying true to his vision, his art. And in that moment, Julian realized that the journey was never about arriving at some final destination. It was about continuing to evolve, to grow, and to create something meaningful. His legacy wasn't just about the art he had made, it was about the stories he had told, the emotions he had captured, and the authenticity he had stayed true to. Julian Harris wasn't just an artist. He was a storyteller, and his story had only just begun.